morning. My name is MILIND. I'm an Indian from the city of Pune. I am a Maharashtrian by birth. A bit about my family. I came from a lower middle class family. My mother worked in a public sector unit right from the age of 16 when she began as a manual labor worker and then rose up to a clerical stage over the 40 years. And my father, who was a social activist, right from the inception, he joined the Bhudan movement in 1950s and later on joined the Rashtra Seva Dal and then later on became a trade unionist. My mother also actually was also involved in social activities. She was a part of the struggle for the state formation of Maharashtra. She later had also been a part of Rashtra Seva Dal, where both my parents met. So they have both been seminal influence on my life. However, since my father was a full-time activist, it was the burden of looking after the family came on my mother. So she single-handedly handled this challenge. I also have an elder sister who is an HOD of English department in a local college in Pune. Because we came from a slightly difficult economic systems, when I came of age, I had to take up a job in the IT sector, which had just started around 1990, late 80s and 90s, which I worked with for about 20 odd years. However, the influence of my upbringing was very, very strong, and I kept on feeling that just joining the bandwagon of corporate success was not really giving a meaning to my life, and often I felt like I was sort of cheating my the values I had grown up with, because the values which both my parents had. My mother was a feminist, my father was influenced by Gandhian socialism, and the kind of life I was leading was sort of in opposition to what I had been brought up with. I struggled with this and for a longish time, and actually was later on also started reading in order to try and understand the world I was living in. I started reading Gandhi, of course, then I also read people like Karl Marx, Martin Luther King, and from each of them I sort of tried to understand my own situation in life. I was being pulled both ways, and I had to finally take a call as to what it was that I wanted to commit my life to in order to make it meaningful for me. And so in around 2007, I joined an organization called KALPAVRIKSH, which functions in the area of environmental justice. And within that, I particularly work on the theme of social well-being and justice. Some of the key values which I have learned from, say, people like Gandhi or Martin Luther King, my particular interest is how can one translate that into one at the level of individual relationships, and also how can one try and bring about a society based on these values. Yeah, and so these values really inspired me, and I said that enough is enough. Enough of this corporate slavery, and let me get out there and do something about it, and maybe foment a revolution. Of course, I was younger, and young people tend to be idealistic, and they think that you jump into the fray and of struggle, and things will start moving. Uh, so my first project was actually, it was a sort of a research project, but through that project I was trying to understand what is the ground situation of the tribal people working in India. It was a project for UNESCO trying to understand the impact of India's conservation policies vis-a-vis the Millennium Development Goals, as to whether the Indian policies have helped them come out of poverty. Obviously, the findings were nowhere near what the government of India had promised, or Millennium Development Goals hope for. But it was an enlightening experience for me that, what we think idealistically and what we, how, for example, one of the key issues was how do you speak about social change to, or political change and change in the system to a person who, in what language do you speak? Because the kind of concerns they are coming up with are really basic material survival concerns. And if you just go with the idea of talking about Gandhi and revolution and all, it doesn't necessarily translate into their understanding, or you do not, especially urban activists like us, or me particularly, maybe it could have been my limitation, didn't seem to have the language to communicate with these people. As a result, I think I actually went into sort of a minor depression, because I felt that there was absolutely nothing I can actually do. Uh, it was one of the most difficult times of my life. Another thing I had to, I suddenly realized that while I was living in the corporate lifestyle, which I spoke about earlier, money was never an issue. But moving to the social sector, money suddenly became an issue, because all my savings were increasing, getting becoming no savings at a very fast rate. So one has to redefine one's relationship with money, and the, how does one look at it? It's very easy to speak of a revolution on a full stomach, as they say, but when it comes down to actual day-to-day struggle, so in a certain sense, it also helps you build up a sense of solidarity with people who you want to, whose issues you want to address. But also at that is a moment of truth where you realize that you cannot only in order to be a agent of change, you also have to experience some of the hardships of those whose life you want to play a role in changing. So these sort of challenges forced me to rethink about my own relationship with myself, and that was a time I started becoming engaging with spiritual ideas. I had never ever thought that I was a spiritual kind, but I started sort of I did a meditation course in Vipassana at that point. And so then I realized that what I was lacking was, also in a certain sense, I needed to build up my spiritual resources. One is to be able to actually be the change I wanted to see outside. So here is where I think Gandhi's teachings suddenly became relevant. It's one thing to read Gandhi, and another thing to bring Gandhi to life in your own being. And I realized that uh, things, when you talk about social change, you actually need to begin with yourself, and you need to build up your own resources, spiritual resources. If it has to be a long-term battle, because there is always this danger of burnout, and I had experienced some aspect of that burnout, and it took me a few years, believe it or not, to come out of that. And again, reinvigorate myself. Of course, this is not to say that I did this on my own. I met in the whole process, I met many activists, many icons who had themselves gone through this process of entering into the field of social change with high motivation at a relatively younger age, and going through a process of disillusionment, some of them burn out, but again coming back to a more mellowed, mature understanding of what social change means. And so I was, in a certain sense, mentored by senior activists, and I somehow managed to go through that rough patch, and again sort of come back to the values I had started with, but in a slightly less egoistic way, I started realizing that it's not only me uh, who is going to foment that revolution, but I myself have to undergo a sort of revolutionary inner change and approach the whole situation in a more humbler way, a way of listening to the people rather than talking to the people. And I'm still on that journey. In fact, my whole interest in social well-being and justice is a twin, in a sort of sense. I'm trying to bring together my twin concern: the concern about individual well-being and the concern for social justice. I can see the inner connection. If you want to fight the good fight for social justice, you cannot really do it in an egoic way. You cannot do it in this way that uh, will not, you. If you are really wanting to go to the long hard way, then you really need to have a very good relationship with yourself, those who you are engaging with. These were some of the lessons I would want any new activist to begin, as have even before they embark on the journey.